10 reasons why knights were terrible warriors. Honestly, noble ones, I don't know where you get these. But how bad can it be? Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. Today we're looking at this list verse, and they are teaching us some very interesting, accurate history. Sarcastic face. Let's have fun, let's jump right into it. The knights of medieval Europe are among the most recognized warriors of human history. They played a key role in the society and warfare of the Middle Ages, and their ideals of chivalry survive to this very day. Wonderful start. What many don't realize, however, here we go, is that knights weren't actually all that great as a fighting force. Below are 10 reasons why knights made absolutely terrible warriors. Knights. Absolutely terrible warriors. Where is my mace? Number 10, they were a logistical nightmare. If there was one factor that greatly limited the destructive nature of war in the Middle Ages, it was logistics. Well, not just in the Middle Ages, I'd like to underline. The supplying, housing and movement of armies. Logistically speaking, knights were a huge burden. For starters, a knight never went to war alone. At the very least, he brought a squire who, yeah, exactly, he brought a squire. It's not like it's the duke's problem or the king's problem. Who would carry his armor and tend to his horse, which actually shows that the knights knew what they were doing. I mean, good luck going on your own and having to carry all of your armor, everything you need, the food, and then having to take care of the armor. You know, with a squire and a couple of servants, that actually really helps. I don't see the problem there. Maybe a misunderstanding. The horses needed to graze. Further restricted the speed of an army. There's a problem with their English here. An army's movement, and made warfare a difficult proposition in winter or in arid climates. Well, that was always a problem. I mean, fighting in winter was so much of a problem that even the ancient Romans, who were the masters of logistics, avoided doing military campaigns in winter. They mostly did it during summer, which is why they had different kinds of camps. Castra Hibernia was specific, but anyways, I can make a dedicated video on that. I don't want to go off topic, but I'm just saying this is not a problem specifically about the medieval period. And again, fighting in arid climate, that could be problematic and demanding for any army. A great example of these logistical burdens comes from the Crusades, where one of the leading causes of death for knights was actually lack of fodder and lack of fodder and water for their horses rather than combat. Let me get this straight. If you don't have the fodder, so if you don't feed the horse and water it, the knight dies. If you really wanted to look for a reason for knights to die worse than combat, it would be disease. But let's continue. Number 9. Limited service. While the specifics varied from country to country and over time, the feudal obligation of knights only required them to provide military service for about 40 days per year. 40 or 60 days, the number is still sort of under debate, particularly when referring to the debate between Hollister and J.C. Holt. But yeah, around that number. Although of course the number could be extended, it's just that the king had to pay them after that. Worse yet, knights could refuse service altogether and instead pay a fee called scutage. Scutage is a massive, ginormous topic. In fact, if you're interested, let me know in the comments below and I will make a dedicated video. For this part, suffice to say, yes, scutage existed and it was a way for medieval knights to avoid going on campaign. But then again, it varied so much that even if we focus on the English scutage alone, sometimes the king couldn't still enforce it if they really needed it, and even when the knights paid scutage to avoid serving in that specific campaign, guess what? The money could have been used by the king to pay other knights and mercenaries. You're still getting the knights you need for war. He makes it sound like, oh my gosh, all the knights he paid scutage, and so the king didn't have knights. As well as the increased use of mercenaries, particularly in England by the 100 Years' War, the English army was composed almost entirely of paid men, while the knights were paid too. So they did do a little bit of research here, so I still don't understand how someone who does some research comes with a premise such as knights made absolutely terrible warriors. I mean, you can do the best research in the world, you'll never be able to defend that. These men could serve as long as they were paid and were also more experienced and disciplined than knights. No, that's a case-by-case scenario. You would have had an inexperienced man-at-arm and you would have had a very experienced veteran knight. Number 8, they were expensive. Oh, this is great. Oh, this one is good. This one is good. Because of the elaborate armor, weapons and powerful horses, knights were incredibly expensive. The equipment of an English knight, by one figure, was worth about 32 Anglo-Saxon pounds by the mid-13th century, about 10 years worth of wages for an archer. By contrast, an archer could be fully equipped for about 4% of that cost. The knight's most prized possession was the warhorse, which could cost as much as £300. An average craftsman, well okay, knights didn't come cheap. They cost roughly twice as much as a man-at-arms. For the cost of a single knight, it was much more pragmatic to equip a dozen infantrymen or archers. This is really weird because the reason why knights were so expensive and the reason why armor is so expensive is because it works. And the fact that the premise of this entire thing is the knights basically didn't work and were a terrible fighting force, it doesn't explain why then they were so well paid. Why would you pay them so many times more than a regular spearman, for example, or an archer, or a crossbowman if they were so bad? The logic doesn't work. And also let's make sure that we understand that people from the medieval period were anything but stupid. I think there is a great way to picture this. A medieval knight in full plate armor on top of his expensive horse would be a good equivalent of a full-on modern-day unit of armor, meaning tanks. Have you ever heard anyone saying, tanks are terrible because they're so expensive? Do you want to know how expensive a modern tank made with cutting-edge modern technology cost? This much. Of course they were expensive. They were top of the line. Okay, let's move to number 7. I'm having a great day. Adherence to chivalric ideas, and here we go. In war, you kill or get killed, so it's crucial to use whatever you can to your advantage. Knights, however, held an idealized view of the battlefield. No, knights didn't. You, writer of this, hold an idealized view of the battlefield, I think. I find it rather disrespectful towards people who actually did go to war and fought on a battlefield. In fact, it's even disrespectful to modern day soldiers and veterans who really experienced battle, because it's like saying, I, writing this article, understand more about what it really means to be on a battlefield than people who actually fought on fields. My English is broken today. I love studying military history, but I would never go to a real soldier and tell him, hey, I understand the battlefield better than you. No, I don't. Let's keep some humility in here and recognize people with real experiential knowledge. For example, there was this expectation that knights should battle other knights on fair terms, and if they were defeated and withdrew, they should not be pursued. There was also widespread practice of taking defeated knights as hostages and ransoming them back rather than killing them outright. Well, I really do think that this person, whoever it is, no hate, but I think they're really misunderstanding. Oh, so you would ransom an enemy knight instead of killing them? Well, that's stupid. It's not stupid. They could make a huge amount of money. Medieval mounted nobility, they were worth a lot of money alive because you could ask for ransom. So yes, it would be much more beneficial to take them prisoners. This also has a sort of double effect, meaning that it's good for the offenders to take them captives, but it's also good for the knights themselves, or the duke or the prince, whoever, because it's a sort of life insurance. The fact that you had a noble title, wealth, money, power, could usually see it because of how amazing their armor looked, and of course their coat of arms, meant that if anything went completely wrong and you got surrounded and dismounted, the fact that you are who you are, you're a medieval noble knight, meant that they're not gonna kill you because of the ransom situation. It was a very intelligent and intricate battle system here. Poor leadership. If there is one area in which we can excuse the knights themselves, it's leadership. By and large, the men who commanded feudal armies were little more than glory-seeking nobility with no actual military training. The majority of nobility got military training. This is very strange that you would say this. Meanwhile, one of the most ridiculous examples of poor leadership occurred at the Battle of Crécy, where John the Blind, King of Bohemia, a lot of these battles are the exception. They were so jaw-dropping that we have them in the historical record in very high detail. That is the reason why they tell us so much about these. I'm sure he's going to mention the Battle of Golden Spurs. I'm sure he's going to mention it. But again, these are battles that do not defy the rule. They are the exception. Reality about the honor code is that yes, it existed, a sort of idea of how knights should behave, probably, which predates and goes all the way back to early types of moral codes that began in the equestrian ancient Roman class. With that being said, a lot of people ignored it. In fact, medieval people ignored a lot of things. I mean, crossbowmen were banned by the Catholic Church. It's not like anyone cared. That's why I'm saying I think the writer of this article is the one having a very idealized image of what medieval war sounded like. He thinks that all medieval knights are going to be honorable and they're all going to be like, oh yes, I'm going to be very courteous. You dropped your sword, please pick it up. Don't worry, I will never stab you in the back. No, that's weirder than he's the one calling knights the ones who had an idealized concept of war. Number 5, lack of standardized training. For hundreds of years, knights were the closest thing to professional soldiers in medieval Europe. They had years of training on how to ride horses, fighting armor, and use a variety of weapons, and medieval tournaments gave them a chance to keep their skills sharp in peacetime. Exactly. Nevertheless, that doesn't change the fact that outside of training in their youth as pages and squires, there was no formal standard system for training knights. Even though you didn't have a standardized training from a modern perspective or an ancient Roman perspective, still these people knew exactly what they were doing, and knights dominated the field of battle for hundreds of years. He makes it sound like, oh, they had no standardized training. Yeah, they did the occasional joust, but they didn't know what they were doing. Outside of training their youth as pages and squires, there was no formal training. No, they kept training. Knights trained all the time. Also because a lot of them had a lot of time, because they were wealthy. 4. Poor teamwork. Discipline and organization are some of the most important aspects of warfare. This is a major reason why the Romans were so good at war. Knights, however, had a tendency to fight as individuals. He's generalizing too much. This can be true comparatively to the Romans. It's true, but knights did work as cohesive units, and if we go a little after the medieval period and we look into the professional gendarmes, very effective, heavily armored, full-plate knights. I've got a dedicated video link below. Number 3, reliance on favorable terrain. Given that knights rode horses, they required solid, flat and open ground to be effective, which is where you mostly fight. If forced into a clash in mountainous or muddy terrain, they lost their mobility and shock value, which is also one of the reasons why in response, English knights were famous for dismounting their horses and fighting on foot. Another prominent example of using terrain against knights was the Battle of the Golden Spurs. I knew it! I friggin' knew it! As we continue this article, you'll see that he will praise a lot the English longbow, the English archers, but even English archers, which we can all agree were a great fighting force, would be the perfect choice in every single possible scenario. And if a commander makes a mistake and asks its archers to shoot, for example, outside of range, that doesn't mean that the archers suck as a fighting force. It just means that that commander made a mistake. Similar example, Genoese crossbowmen at the Battle of Crécy. It's not that Genoese crossbowmen are not effective. We know that they were an exceptional fighting force, but during that battle, because of the weather, it rained a lot, their crossbows didn't work. Number 2, archers ruined their day. This may come as a surprise, but knights were actually quite vulnerable to archers. Mail armor could be pierced by bows from distances of 180 meters, 600 feet, meaning that knights could get killed long before they got close. Better yet, experienced bowmen could fire a rate of 12 arrows per minute. While the introduction of full-plate armor in the 15th century was a big help, it didn't make knights invulnerable to missile attacks. Crossbows were still capable of piercing plate. Archers were so deadly that knights developed a huge disdain for them. They're making it sound like archers were so deadly they could kill knights like it's nothing. Regardless of their armor, that's not the case, again. And then he goes on to talk more about the Battle of Agincourt, and he says, using the power of the Welsh longbow, which wasn't Welsh. Let's move to number 1. They were easily defeated by professional infantry. That easily should really not be there. Professional infantry was the Achilles heel of the knight. Disciplined infantry soldiers deployed in phalanx formation and armed with pole arms weapons such as pikes rendered heavy cavalry all but useless. So this is again very reductive, and it's also very misleading. It is true that the pike was very effective not only against cavalry but also against other forms of infantry, but it wasn't decisive, which is why what will become a very decisive form of unit is pike and shot, meaning guns protected by pikes. All the infantry had to do was hold their ground. Not as easy as you think. As you can see, he says no, it was Swiss pikemen, they made the knights completely obsolete. He talks about battles in 1386 and 1477, even though knights again will not become obsolete at this time, but will in fact evolve into the full-plate gendarmes that I mentioned before. That is not what obsolete looks like. But regardless, let me know what you think in the comments below, which one of these points you think wasn't so bad, and what things you agreed with and what things you didn't agree with, and what do you think of this article? I mean, I've read much worse, but the main problem of this article is in fact its premises. Some of the information that they gave wasn't too bad. Some was a little superficial, but not necessarily completely wrong, whereas other things were in fact wrong. But But the main problem, as I say, is indeed the premise of this whole article, which is the sentence, "These are the reasons why knights made absolutely terrible warriors." If the premise is false, it doesn't matter how much ink you put down on paper to try and justify it and defend it, the result will still be the same. It's wrong. Alright everyone, so well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.